As the planet warmed and the global economy got worse, most countries would end up falling to either socialism or far-right nationalism. Case in point, Mexico. Mexico's socialist revolution, however, would not last long. The idea of a socialist country being to their south after just fighting a war against socialists was absolutely appalling to Oliver Grant and the Americans, and so the new American Republic would just invade. Yeah. Meanwhile, in Asia, a series of violent skirmishes in Kashmir would lead to an Indian invasion of Pakistan. After the signing of a nuclear arms treaty in 2036, both sides had come to an agreement that neither country would use nuclear weapons in warfare. But as Pakistan began losing more and more territory, they began to reconsider the nuclear option. Thankfully, cooler heads would prevail, given that both countries weren't the biggest fans of total nuclear Armageddon, but Pakistan still had a mild case of being invaded. So what were they to do? The answer? Ask someone else to fix their problems for them. Pakistan would send a letter to the Chinese asking them if they could maybe help to resolve this total clusterfuck of a situation. And sure enough, they did. Soon, Chinese forces would storm through Kashmir, rescuing their Pakistani ally from the brink of defeat. Now the tables had turned, and it was India who was on the brink of collapse. Chinese forces would hold a military parade in Delhi as the Indian armies crumbled. All hope became lost for the Indians. As India held off the Chinese army, they threatened nuclear annihilation if the Chinese dared to go any further. Chinese forces were forced to retreat, lest they destroy the entire world. And so India was split between what was left of India's old government in the south and a pro-Chinese puppet regime in the north. Pakistan would also gain Kashmir. Meanwhile, back in the US, America had defeated those dastardly commies down in Mexico and established a puppet regime, forcing them at gunpoint to use miles and feet instead of kilometers and meters. Even though the old socialist regime kind of sucked, the American occupation made everything miles worse. Nobody really liked the occupation at all, and the leader of Mexico, Carlos Diaz, was largely seen as a capitalist puppet from the greedy, evil, money-grubbing Yankees, mostly because he was. But most people in Mexico knew it was only a matter of time before the regime was overthrown again. Back in India, however, the government was having some trouble. They had just declared martial law after losing the war. Suddenly, pro-democracy protests would erupt all across the south of India, which the Indian government would crush violently. And then these protests would erupt into a full-blown revolution, maybe. Eventually, the rebels would manage to completely overrun all of South India, establishing a democratic socialist state. Because of this, the old Indian government would flee to their old enemy of China, and ask for China to help them put down the rebellion. China absolutely hated India, but they were worried that if India fell to a pro-democracy rebellion, then China might be next. So China would invade South India. But then, a massive counteroffensive would begin against the Chinese. Because of this, the Chinese realized it wasn't worth their time to keep going. And finally, they would sign a ceasefire with the rebels, splitting South India in two. And then time ended, and that was the last thing that ever happened in history. Just kidding, but this is the end of this video, so bye.